Some people only understand after your absence. They only recognize your worth when they no longer have access to you. You tried. You gave everything. You waited for maturity from someone who could barely handle their own ego. You were there in empty days. You listened when no one else would. But in the end, they still made you seem like you were too much for loving so deeply. And that's when silence starts to scream, not as revenge, but as truth. Because some silences don't stay quiet. They teach. Some absences don't fade. They educate. And those who lost you feel it. They feel it like someone who realizes too late that they hurt the one place where peace existed. This video isn't about revenge. It's about invisible justice. It's about the silent return that the universe delivers, even if no one sees it. Today, you'll understand the 9 invisible wounds that open in others when your presence turns to silence. You'll discover why your absence hurts so much and how that silence can be, at the same time, both healing and an answer. But before we continue, write in the comments, "Those who learn from absence don't return the same." That phrase will seal your presence in this video. And if this topic has already stirred something in you, subscribe to the channel right now, because what you're about to hear might change how you deal with any loss. The wound of the echo. When silence answers better than 1,000 words, some silences don't stay quiet. They linger. They hover like invisible ghosts in the empty rooms of memory. When you disappear without a word, what remains is a sound only those who lost you can hear. It's the sound of their own mistakes echoing between the walls of what was once your presence. No soundtrack cuts deeper than the echo of regret. Because when silence is the response, it spares no one from what they already know. It only exposes everything they ignored. In that echo, the first wounds emerge, the ones that don't bleed outwardly but seep within, like muffled guilt, like conversations that never happened but hurt as if they'd been shouted. You said nothing, but you said everything. And that's what unsettles those who expected a confrontation. Your absence wasn't an act of disdain. It was a manifesto of inner strength. A silent, elegant, stoic protest. A reminder that not all love begs, not all respect demands, and not all pain needs an audience. When you vanish with grace, leaving only the lightness of a presence that was once steadfast, the other faces a mirror, and in that mirror is their own guilt. Stoicism teaches that not reacting is a virtue, that there's wisdom in letting the other hear their own noise, because those who err and still expect applause aren't ready to hear their own echo. Silence is a hall of mirrors, and those who lost you, stepping into it, find only reflections of what they refused to see when there was still time. Every memory becomes a thorn. Every detail of your absence becomes an unanswered question. Powerful silence isn't a punishment. It's a chance to mature away from your presence, to understand, even if too late, the value of what was lost. Because what echoes isn't just unspoken words, but unacted gestures, disregarded efforts, disbelieved feelings. And that echo hurts. It hurts because it carries everything you offered in silence, which the other, in their emotional deafness, refused to hear. And now, without your voice, all that remains is the noise of what can never return. So, if you've ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, know this. The silence that feels empty today is, in truth, the seed of your flourishing. It may not have applause, answers, or an audience, but it carries the essence of an ancient, profound, stoic wisdom. Because true strength isn't in winning arguments, but in mastering yourself. And the truest response often lies in the unsaid, in the unexplained, in simply leaving lightly, without warning, and letting the echo speak for you, letting the void teach what your presence had already warned, but no one chose to hear. If this reflection touched you in any way, Pause for a moment now. Breathe. And let this silence transform you too. Leave your like if these words echoed a pain you've lived through. And subscribe to the channel, because here, silence teaches and pain turns into wisdom. Comment below. The echo of silence teaches more than 1,000 words. That shows me you're with me on this Stoic journey. The fear of the irreversible. When they realize they've truly lost you, there comes a moment when absence stops being a shock and becomes a verdict. At first, they might see you as just someone hurt, someone who'll come back once their heart settles. But as time passes, your absence takes shape. It starts to hurt differently, not as a pause, but as a decision. That's when they realize you're not waiting for an apology or preparing a speech. You're simply at peace. And that peace you found without them is the greatest pain for those who lost you. Because there's no more noise, no more attempts, just the powerful silence of your freedom. That's when the most feared wound is born, the wound of irreversibility. When the realization hits, when they understand you're not playing an emotional game, you're truly gone. Not out of anger, not to provoke longing. You simply retreated into your own world where there's more silence than drama, more stoic wisdom than impulsiveness. And that, for someone who once fed off your efforts, is terrifying. Because control slipped through their fingers. Because what was once guaranteed is now a void. And that void can no longer be filled with empty promises or dressed-up excuses. What was lost is lost for good. The Stoic mind doesn't make noise when it decides to leave. And perhaps that's why it hurts so much. Because there's no room for negotiation. No emotional plea can undo what's been settled in the depths of the one who left. Strategic absence leaves no clues. It doesn't ask for permission, send a note, or warn it's the last time. It simply takes root and changes everything. Those who lost you now realize you're not playing hard to get. You're prioritizing yourself, and that shatters any illusion of control. Because silence cannot be manipulated, and for someone once addicted to your presence, that's the harshest sentence. The fear of the irreversible is like a constant whisper in the back of their mind. You lost someone who will never return the same. And this kind of loss isn't announced loudly. It's felt in the empty breakfast table, the notification that never arrives, the forgotten birthday, the songs that once meant something and now hurt. Everything becomes a sign. Everything becomes absence that teaches. Because the emotional pain of realizing you went too far doesn't need a scream. It needs just a shred of awareness, and that sometimes is what's most lacking in those who only learn after the damage is done. When silent regret appears, there's nothing left to say. Because your absence is a field where nothing blooms anymore. And the cruelest part is that those who lost you can't even complain. Because you didn't hurt them. You didn't fight. You didn't retaliate. You just left. And that hurts in a way no revenge could. It's the power of silence at its peak. It's as if time has put everything in its place, except them, who now live lost, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. But it's too late. Because those who sow neglect reap distance. And distance, once solid, is an abyss no one crosses unscathed. Life is made of cycles, and Stoics know this. They don't cling to permanence, but to coherence. When the other realizes you're not hurt, but healed, and that's why you left, the desperation begins. Because as long as there was pain, there was a bond. But when there's healing, there's an end. And the end is silent. It doesn't send prior notice. It simply settles in. Those who didn't value your presence will never be prepared to handle your definitive absence. And when that absence stops being a tactic and becomes a destiny, fear takes hold. Because now, there's nothing left to negotiate. And that fear of the irreversible is the wound that bleeds most without being seen. It erodes from within. It shows up in forced smiles, staged stories, poorly disguised hints. They try to show they're fine, but it's all empty. Because only you know what you gave, what you forgave, how much you endured in silence. And now that you've left with dignity, your absence has become a mirror that screams, "You lost someone who gave their all, and now withdrew out of wisdom." Not for revenge, but for self-preservation. It's important to remember that those who don't understand the value of silence will never grasp the depth of your absence. Noise confuses, distracts, masks, but silence reveals. And those who hurt you might only realize the magnitude of their mistake when it's too late to do things differently. Regret comes, yes, but it comes quietly, and it comes when there's no more dialogue. It comes when you no longer care. And that's the cruelest fear, realizing they lost. And there's no silent return, no invisible justice that can undo what was broken. Stoicism teaches, don't cling to the pain they forced you to feel. Cling to the strength it made you develop. And that inner strength is what made you leave without drama, made you stay silent without weakness, made you transform emotional pain into wisdom. The other might try to justify, rewrite, or romanticize the past. But those who carry the peace of silence don't need to explain anything. Your absence already says it all. And those who didn't value you now feel it. Feel it like someone waking up too late to a love that's already become the past. You may not see the effect of your silence, but it's there. Working silently too. Deconstructing narratives, challenging egos, planting longing where there was once neglect. And those who lost you now understand. The problem was never you. It was the illusion that you'd always be there. But now, everything's changed. And the fear of the irreversible isn't just fear of your absence, it's fear of their own conscience. Fear of knowing they had everything and didn't know how to care for it. And that fear is just the beginning of other wounds still to come. And if all this resonated within you, take a deep breath. Because there's more, much more. Because silence doesn't just respond, it transforms. And in the next part, we'll talk about a wound that doesn't heal with time. Late regret. A pain that arrives when memories can no longer be relived. Nadat. Late regret. Memories that hurt because they can't be relived. Time has a subtle and sometimes cruel way of teaching. It doesn't shout, doesn't warn, doesn't plead. It simply passes. And when it does, it takes with it the chance to do things differently. That's when late regret is born, not the regret that tries to fix things. The other kind. The one that comes after everything, when there's nothing left to say, when absence has crystallized and no silent return can heal it. Late regret is the lament that lives in the empty corners of memory, where every recollection turns into an emotional pain that burns, because it can no longer be lived again. Those who lost you might not have noticed at first. They might have carried on as if it were just another fight, another fleeting silence. But time, that invisible craftsman of reality, slowly shows what was left behind. The messages that don't return, the gaze that will no longer meet theirs, the coffee no one prepares anymore. The small things, those that seemed trivial, now become monuments of longing. And each one hurts, because what stings isn't just what was lost, it's knowing it was ignored when it was still there. The strategic absence you cultivated, rooted in stoicism and self-control, began as protection, but now it's a mirror reflecting what could have been. And those who didn't value you before now rummage through memories like someone searching for a treasure they didn't realize was right before their eyes. Memories don't come with a cheerful soundtrack. They come with silence, a powerful silence that cuts deep, that activates the stoic mind of those who see too late. That's when the details become daggers, that laugh, that message, that silent help. It all comes back, but it comes back as pain. Late regret is subtle. It arrives disguised as nostalgia, but soon reveals itself as an unwelcome guest. It shows up on nights when no one's around, on days when the mask of pride slips. It visits like an invisible presence that hammers, "What if I had done things differently?" But now, there's no more time. No more presence. Just memories. And those memories, in silence, hurt more than any confrontation. Because they carry the weight of neglect, and that's a weight no one can share. Stoicism teaches not to feed expectations of others, but of yourself. You understood that, and that's why you left. That's why you chose the path of silence, of elegance, of vanishing with grace. Not as an escape, but as a response. Not as punishment, but as liberation. Meanwhile, those who lost you are still trying to figure out what they did. But there's no script for conscience. It just wakes up, belatedly, and points to what could have been done with more presence, more care, more reciprocity. And that internal pointing hurts. It hurts because it can't be undone. It's in the space between regret and the impossibility of fixing things that remorse grows. It grows like ivy on forgotten walls. It clings to memories, feeds on what doesn't return, and suffocates the present with ghosts of the past. Those who lost you don't just feel longing. They feel the weight of not having valued you when it was still possible, and that erodes in silence. It's not seen in the eyes, but in actions, in empty attempts at contact, in signs begging for a chance. But now, you're in another place, emotionally, spiritually, stoically. And from there, you don't return to the same point. There's a difference between losing and realizing you lost. The first is the event, the second is the wound. And that second one takes time, because those who live in distraction don't see what they have. But when conscience knocks, and it always does, what's left is the void. A void that can't be filled with pretty words. Not with apologies, not with flowers, because you left at the right time, when there was still dignity, when there was still strength to not retaliate, to not beg, to not diminish yourself. That's stoic wisdom. That's inner strength. Those who try to revive what they neglected don't find a return. They find an echo, and the echo doesn't answer questions. It only repeats what was said in silence. You lost me. That's the message embedded in your absence. That's the silent response the other receives when they try to retrace a path already buried by time. And in that echo, the pain lives. A pain that isn't yours. It belongs to those who stayed with the memory of something they didn't know how to care for. And now, trying to rebuild, they realize the debris is made of longing and regret. Stoicism doesn't teach retaliation. It teaches moving forward. It teaches that there's power in not reacting. And you moved forward, with emotional detachment, with dignity, with silence, not to be remembered with guilt, but to be respected in your absence. And those who lost you, now feel it. Feel it without being able to express it. Because there's no more space, no more access. Just the painful certainty that they lost someone who doesn't return the same way. And if they do return, it won't be to occupy the same place. And perhaps that's the cruelest point of late regret. It doesn't change the past. It only illuminates with a cold light everything that could have been and wasn't. And in that light, invisible wounds emerge. Not in the body, but in the soul. And the soul that erred feels. Feels like someone who touched something sacred with hands dirtied by haste. And now they carry the weight of having wasted a presence that was healing. In the end, those who lost you will keep searching in others for what you were. They'll try to relive in new beginnings what only existed in your way, but they won't find it. Because your absence isn't a hole, it's a mark. And marks aren't replaced. They only remind. And every memory carries a bit of pain, especially when it's too late. And the most curious thing? That pain will still grow, because pride one day falls silent, but the echo of what doesn't return, that keeps screaming. And in the next topic, you'll understand how pride one day also melts in the face of the mirror of loneliness. Melted pride. When those who hurt you see themselves alone in the mirror. At first, pride shouts. It dons armor, throws sharp words, disguises itself as strength when, in truth, it's fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of admitting fault. Fear of showing vulnerability to someone who already saw their soul bare. And when you leave in silence, without drama, without detours, without scandal, pride still tries to hold its pose. It tells others it was their choice, that they don't need you, that it's better this way. But inside, it starts to drip. It starts to crack, because nothing is more disarming than the power of silence from someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The strategic absence you chose is the first blow against that fragile wall called ego, because those who pretend they don't care count the days waiting for your return. And when it doesn't come, the melting begins. Slowly, silently. It's not something the world sees. It's something the mirror reveals. The Stoic mind doesn't need to confront. It simply steps away with dignity. And that stepping away, that vanishing with grace, forces the other to look inward. And it's there, facing their own reflection, that pride begins to crumble. Because it was built to impress others, but it never withstood internal truth. What you offered, no one else offers the same. And it's not about comparison, but about essence, real presence, mature love, genuine listening. And when all that disappears, what's left for those who hurt you is a cracked mirror, a reflection that no longer lies. Because now, in your absence, silence has become a teacher. And it teaches without words, but with surgical precision. It teaches that those who try to win over others through vanity lose themselves in loneliness, and that loneliness is the furnace where pride melts, slowly, until it turns into silent regret. Stoicism teaches that true strength is internal, not theatrical, that it's not the loudest who's right, but the one who masters their emotions amidst chaos. You understood that. You chose not to retaliate, and by doing so, you placed the other face to face with themselves. You took away the spotlight. You cut the stage. And what's left? A soul trying to sustain a mask that no longer fits, because time has passed, because you're no longer there to reaffirm the value of someone who never recognized you. And now, those who hurt you see themselves alone, without applause, without an audience, without you. Pride is a sophisticated trap. It makes people believe that pushing away is winning, but time shows that the true winner is the one who doesn't need to diminish others to feel great. Your absence laid that bare. Because you left without hurting. You left with the calm of someone who knows their peace isn't negotiable, and that calm, that silent resolve, became unbearable for those who thrive on emotional provocation. Because the Stoic mind isn't swayed by theatrics, it observes, reflects, and moves on. And that moving on, without looking back, is what hurts the most. Those who lost you now revisit everything. That day, that phrase, that unnecessary reaction, everything seems small compared to what was destroyed. But now it's too late. Because there's no erasing the words spoken, nor the actions chosen. What's done is done. And when the realization hits, pride has already melted. It's become a puddle on the floor of their conscience. And no one can hide from themselves. Not for long. The absence that teaches is the same one that denounces. It denounces that those who hurt weren't strong. They were insecure. And you were too strong to stay in a place where you had to keep explaining yourself. That's the turning point. When emotional pain surpasses the theater of ego. when the other understands you didn't leave out of pettiness, but out of wisdom. And that changes everything, because pride is only fed while there's an audience. But when there's no one left to watch, it becomes a burden. And those who hurt you now carry the weight of having made someone leave without a fuss. That hurts. That leaves a mark, because no one forgets someone who left in silence, but taught through absence. No one forgets the silent return of conscience. The Stoic mind, by choosing silence, breaks a cycle, the cycle of reactivity, the cycle of needing to be understood. You broke that cycle, and by doing so, you made the other lose themselves within. Because they weren't prepared for your silence, they expected shouts, justifications, scandals. But what they got was emptiness, and emptiness is too uncomfortable for those who always found emotional control outside themselves but never knew what to do with what pulses within. Now, alone with the mirror, those who hurt you must face themselves, and that's a punishment no external judgment can surpass. When pride falls, what remains is truth, and the truth hurts, because it shows that the one who left was the one who truly loved, who sustained, who held things together. And now that they're gone, there's no rebuilding without pain. The house collapsed, and it collapsed silently, not with a crash, but with absence. With that absence that teaches, that hurts, that exposes, and those who lost you are now alone. Not alone in company, but in presence, in essence, in peace. You didn't step away to win a fight. You stepped away to not lose yourself. And that's what separates a wounded ego from a wise soul. The other's pride melted because it found no more fuel. You refused to play the game. And those who can't reach you destroy themselves trying. And when the realization hits, when loneliness becomes a mirror, then everything falls apart, because there's no defense against conscience. And when it speaks, pride falls silent. And that wound will deepen still, because now anxiety begins to surface. That desperate wait for a response that will never come. The pain of someone who needs to hear something, but only finds the silence of your evolution. The invisible anxiety, the wait for a response that never comes. It's curious how silence, this seemingly passive act, can create the most unsettling void within those who once fed off your reactions. Those who lived expecting your response now have only their own anxiety as company, and that wait has no set time, no predictable script. It just pulses, it vibrates, it erodes from within, because there's nothing more desperate for those who lost you than realizing you won't respond anymore. You won't justify, you won't explain. What exists now is silence, and that silence has become a mirror and a punishment. The mind that expected a shout, a demand, a why, now only hears the muffled sound of its own restlessness. Because you chose not to react. You chose the serenity of the Stoic mind, the self-control that needs no scene, no audience. And that creates a devastating effect on those who always used your sensitivity as a thermometer for emotional control. Those who hurt you now wait. Wait for a sign, a text, a glance, a return. But what they get is the weight of your strategic absence, which became a silent response. And every day in silence is like a needle in their conscience. Invisible anxiety doesn't show up in photos, but it's there, in every failed attempt to move on, in every person who comes close but can't fill your place, in every sleepless night where the phone is checked with the hope that, by some miracle, you'll say something. But you don't, because you understood that some responses don't need to be given. They need to be lived, and your absence became the clearest response you could offer. It doesn't shout, but it echoes. It doesn't accuse, but it reveals. And those who feel it know that they lost something time doesn't return. This anxiety in those who lost you isn't the kind that paralyzes the body. It's the kind that accelerates the mind. a restless mind trying to solve what's already out of reach. And that creates a silent torture, imagining scenarios, crafting conversations that will never happen, reliving moments as if there were still a way back. But there isn't, because your stoic mind already understood that not every call needs to be answered, that not every longing deserves a response, and that not reacting is the purest way to preserve your own inner peace. Those who once mocked your sensitivity now miss it. Those who scoffed at your devotion now wish for even a sign that there's still an opening. But there isn't, because you changed course, changed vibration, changed intention, and that change is irreversible. It's like a bridge you crossed, and then burned. The other tries to rebuild? Maybe, but it's too late. Because the anxiety now consuming them isn't just for your response, it's for the time lost, the presence that doesn't return, the emotional pain of someone who realizes they toyed with something sacred. And that pain, though invisible, shows up in the details, in cryptic posts, in ambiguous phrases, in forced reunions, in increasingly desperate attempts to get your attention. But you don't budge, because now you're rooted in your inner strength, rooted in the powerful silence that Stoicism taught you. You don't ignore, you transcend. And transcending is more lethal than any revenge, because it doesn't hurt, it teaches. And those who hurt you learn. Learn the hard way that those who stay silent are sometimes just practicing Stoic wisdom. The absence that teaches is different from the withdrawal that punishes. Your absence isn't an emotional game. It's clarity. It's a boundary. It's emotional maturity. And that clarity unsettles those who still live in the internal chaos of their ego. Anxiety grows because they understand you didn't disappear to provoke. You disappeared to protect yourself, to heal, to live without needing to explain. And that, for someone who fed off your emotional dependence, is a blow, an internal collapse. Because those who always expected your reaction now only have their own voice, and that voice can no longer stay quiet. The wait for a response that won't come takes shape. Sometimes it's a sigh, other times an attempt to feign indifference. But it's all a facade. Inside, there's a disorganized universe trying to rediscover a center you sustained with your presence. And now that you're gone, everything falls apart. Because it's not always love that holds a connection together. Sometimes it's the emotional stability you offered. And when that's gone, anxiety explodes. Because the internal chaos no longer has anything to lean on. You didn't leave to be missed, but you were. And that's not something reversed with promises or apologies. Because time revealed everything you held together. And now, those who lost you live in the tension of every silence. Waiting for a return that won't happen. Waiting for a message that won't be sent. And that wait, that fear, that anxiety, are seeds planted by actions that back then seemed normal. But today, they've become invisible wounds, opened by your serene absence. Stoicism showed you that responding isn't always necessary, that sometimes true power lies in letting time show who was real. And you chose that path, the path of peace that doesn't depend on the other's presence, the path of inner strength that needs no scene. And now, those who lost you are trapped between longing and regret, between the past and silence, between the anxiety of wanting to hear something and the discomfort of knowing that something will never be said. And the cruelest part of this wait is this: it never ends, because you're already gone. But the other is still trying to understand what they did. And that anguish is just the beginning. Because now comes the hardest lesson: the absence that teaches. The absence that teaches. What you were is only understood when you're no longer there. Some presences are only fully revealed. when they become absence. You were there, in every gesture, every moment of listening, every patience that went unnoticed. You embraced what no one else would hear. You endured uncomfortable silences. You swallowed bitter responses for the sake of peace. And still, you were underestimated. Because those who are always available are mistaken for those who will always be. Until one day, you simply stop. You don't fight. You don't shout. You just stop. And those who didn't value you now find themselves in a strange place, a place where your presence made more difference than their pride was willing to admit. Strategic absence doesn't come to avenge. It comes to show, without words, the size of the space you filled. You were the point of emotional balance, the one who softened heavy days, who offered security in the other's instability. But that's only realized when you withdraw. Because powerful silence doesn't just interrupt noise, it reveals the order you maintained without fanfare. And when that order disappears, chaos appears. That's the start of understanding. You weren't an accessory. You were a foundation. And it's at that moment that emotional pain begins to burn in silence. Those who lost you start to see the difference between having you and having anyone. The comparison is inevitable, because no one replicates your listening, your lightness, your silent strength. The Stoic mind, when it withdraws, leaves invisible traces, and those traces are sentences. They show you did more than the other was ready to recognize. Now, with your absence, an awakened conscience begins to sprout, and with it, the longing for what was real but never valued. People tend to look outward for someone to blame, but when you vanish with grace, the only thing left is the mirror. And that mirror doesn't forgive. It shows the details, those moments when you stayed silent to avoid hurting, those instances when you gave in, even when you were right. And everything that was once called exaggeration, drama, or neediness now becomes proof of your worth. The absence that teaches doesn't need to make a scene. It simply lets the other feel in their bones the absence of what they refused to see with their heart. Stoic wisdom doesn't seek approval. It seeks coherence. And you were coherent when you left, realizing that staying would mean abandoning yourself. Those who lost you didn't understand that before, but now they do. Because now, the days are longer. The conversations are shallower. The void is denser. It's not about wanting to go back, but about no longer being able to fill what you left behind. Your absence became a reference, and a reference isn't replaced. It's only recognized too late. The absence that teaches carries a kind of invisible justice. It doesn't demand apologies. It doesn't require regret. It simply shows, with the passing of days, weeks, seasons, that your presence was rare, that your love was steadfast, that your listening was a privilege. And now that it's all gone, the other is left to deal with the void that was once filled by what you were. Not by what you said, nor by what you did, but by how you made them feel. And no one can copy that. The Stoic mind understands that what isn't valued must be returned to silence. And you returned it. Elegantly. Maturely. Without the need for spectacle. And that choice turned your absence into a lesson. Because absence that wounds through pride is forgotten. But absence that teaches through wisdom leaves a mark. And that mark now lives in the other's days. In the places you passed through. In the gestures no one else has, in everything that seemed small, and now weighs like an entire world. Maybe they'll even try to convince themselves you didn't make that much difference. But the truth is that no one misses what didn't truly touch them. And if today there's longing, there's pain, there's silent regret, it's because you touched them. Touched them deeply. Maybe more than you should have. And now, those who stayed, feel it. Feel your absence like someone feels the absence of a home. And that's not solved with distractions or quick replacements, because when the soul recognizes something genuine, no copy satisfies. Stoicism taught you not to beg for recognition, and you, with your inner strength, accepted what hurt, swallowed what you didn't deserve, and left without slamming the door in anger. And that's so rare. It's startling. It's startling because it leaves no room for conflict, and without conflict, there's no excuse to distract from the main fact. You were valuable, and those who lost you now have to face that truth, alone. Because you're no longer available to be underestimated. Those who didn't value your presence now blame themselves, not for what you said, but for what you stopped saying, for what you stopped feeling, for what you, in silence, stopped offering. And that silent absence, repeated day after day, became an invisible, deep, constant wound, a pain that pulses with every attempt to relive what no longer exists. Because you're not the past, your absence that teaches. And that, deep down, is what hurts the most. You didn't leave out of weakness. You left out of respect. Respect for yourself. And those who only realize this afterward learn the hardest way, feeling your absence where they once ignored you. And that changes everything. Because life, when it teaches through absence, doesn't give second chances. It just shows how much was lost and moves on. And those who stayed, let them learn from the void, from the echo, from the silence. Because there, where your soul once was, now only memory remains. And it's at that point of awareness that shame begins to erode from within, and it hurts more than any confrontation. In the next topic, we'll talk about the shame that erodes when they realize how much they hurt you for no reason. The shame that erodes. When they realize how much they hurt you for no reason, there comes a moment when it's no longer longing that hurts. It's shame. Not the shame that shows on the face, but the one that lives in the depths of conscience, the silent, throbbing shame that surfaces when the other finally realizes how much they hurt you and how unnecessary it all was. Because the truth is this: most of the pain they caused you had no justification. It was thoughtless reactions, harsh words, gratuitous disdain, wounds opened by pure ego. And now that you're no longer there, the bill has arrived. And it doesn't come as a demand, it comes as a memory. It's in the small scenes that shame begins to manifest. A place you used to go together, a phrase you used to say, a help you offered without expecting anything in return. Details that seemed ordinary now gain weight, because the powerful silence of your absence amplified everything, and those who lost you start to realize they hurt you, when all you were doing was loving, caring, trying. Silent regret begins to burn, but it's too late. Because the Stoic mind doesn't wait for recognition, it moves on in peace. And that peace now is an absence that hurts more than any confrontation. You never demanded perfection. You only asked for presence, respect, loyalty, a genuine look. But even that was denied you. And the most painful part for those who now blame themselves is knowing they hurt you in moments when you were trying to save what you still believed could be fixed. Now they understand. You weren't fragile. You were too strong for continuing to love even while wounded. And when you left, you didn't just take your body, you took everything that sustained that bond. And those who stayed feel it. Feel the absence and feel the shame. Because hurting someone rare is a mistake the soul never forgets. Stoicism isn't about revenge, it's about transcendence. And you transcended. You didn't stoop, didn't shout, didn't expose. You simply gathered what was left of yourself and moved on. You let silence speak for you. And it spoke. It spoke loudly. It spoke with dignity. It spoke with grace. And now, those who lost you are prisoners of their own conscience. Because the shame of having been unfair to someone who only wanted things to work is unbearable. It's a pain that erodes from within, like emotional acid dissolving every justification used to defend thoughtless actions. Shame doesn't need witnesses. It's enough on its own. It doesn't ask for forgiveness out loud. It just stays there, gnawing at pride, chewing on guilt, reminding them of what was said in moments of arrogance. And you, even from afar, keep teaching. Because your absence became a lesson. Your absence that teaches is now the reflection of what the other couldn't be. Sensitive, grateful, balanced. And those who hurt you for no reason can no longer look at themselves with the same ease. Because where there was once certainty, now there's only remorse. Invisible wounds hurt more because no one sees them. But those who caused them know. Those who hurt you remember every gesture, every inattention, every irony. And those memories don't go away with distractions. Because what was done to you was done to someone with an open heart. And the Stoic mind knows. Time returns everything, not as punishment, but as reflection. And shame is that return. A silent response from the soul to those who one day chose to hurt when they could have cared. Powerful silence, when steeped in integrity, dismantles any narrative. You didn't need to prove you were right, nor justify yourself. You simply withdrew. And the other now tries to stitch together excuses within their own mind, tries to convince themselves you also messed up, but deep down, they know you were trying to save, trying to love, trying to hold together what was already falling apart. And now that you're gone, there's no more escaping the shame. It's in the body, in the face, in the eyes, in the voice that hesitates, in the regret that paralyzes. Some pains time heals. Others, it only makes clearer, and shame is one of those. It doesn't fade. It matures. It gains sharper outlines with the passing days. And those who hurt you live with that weight. The weight of having disregarded something rare, of having been disloyal to someone who only wanted their good, of having pushed away someone who only wanted to stay. And that awakened conscience finds no comfort, because you're no longer there to ease, to justify, to save what can no longer be saved. The Stoic wisdom you carry doesn't seek an audience. It just moves. And as it moves, it leaves traces. Traces of maturity, traces of self-love, traces of someone who learned to withdraw in silence, and those traces now disturb, because they expose the other's mistake without you needing to open your mouth. Your absence is the greatest accusation, and those responsible for it know and feel. Feel like someone condemned not by an external court, but by an internal judge called conscience. Those who hurt for no reason carry the weight of having destroyed something they may never find again. And that's not drama, it's reality. Because what you offered wasn't common. It was profound. It was presence. It was soul. It was inner strength. And now that it's gone, the other understands the size of the abyss they created with their own hands. But it's too late. Because the Stoic mind no longer looks back. It moves forward, silent, steadfast, serene. And that, paradoxically, is what screams the loudest. Shame doesn't need a response. It is the response. And if the other feels it today, it's because you touched them deeply, touched where no one else did. But those who touch can also leave. And when they leave, they take with them the peace that sustained everything. And now, everything has collapsed because you're gone. And in place of what you were, there's only the echo of everything that shouldn't have been said, of everything that never needed to be done, of everything that, if there had been awareness, would have been different. And the most painful part is that now the comparison begins, because the original is gone. and everything that comes after will just be an attempt. In the next topic, we'll talk about the pain of comparison. No one replaces you where you were irreplaceable. Davordi. The pain of comparison. No one replaces you where you were irreplaceable. The most silent pain of those who lose you doesn't start with absence. It starts with comparison. Because it's easy to feign indifference at first, to replace names, to repeat scripts, to recreate encounters. But what no one can copy is the soul you put into every gesture. And when that soul is gone, everything becomes lifeless repetition. The other tries to move on, tries to convince themselves they'll find someone better. But they soon discover, better isn't more beautiful. Better is the one who touched the heart without effort. And you did that with the ease of someone who was whole. The strategic absence you chose didn't just leave a void. It set a standard, a level of devotion, listening, care, and coherence that now becomes a measure. And any attempt to fill the space you occupied stumbles on that standard. And the worst part? Those who lost you can't help but compare. Every new smile feels forced. Every new presence feels rehearsed. Because no one else offers what you offered so naturally. The powerful silence of your departure became an emotional reference impossible to ignore. Stoicism teaches that true strength isn't in being unique, but in being true. And that's what made you irreplaceable. You weren't perfect. You had flaws, doubts, bad days. But you also had truth, real presence. You weren't a performance. You were essence. And when essence leaves, the other discovers they were dealing with something rare. And that discovery comes with a bitter taste. The realization they tried to trade soul for distraction, love for a game, depth for a pastime. And now, what's left is the comparison that erodes. This comparison doesn't need to be spoken. It reveals itself in lost gazes, in conversations that don't flow, in attempts to relive feelings that only existed with you. And every failed attempt only reinforces what's already known deep in the soul. No one replaces you where you were irreplaceable. Your listening, your calm, your sensitivity left marks. Marks that can't be erased or ignored. And those who try end up hurting themselves more. Because comparing the present with what was lost through pride creates a pain that grows in silence. The Stoic mind doesn't seek belated recognition. It seeks coherence. And yours was so steadfast, so serene, so complete, that it's now unbearable for those who only know how to handle chaos, because you were a shelter, a structure, a foundation, and now everything is noise, everything is excess, everything is a copy, and none of it can reach the place where you touched. This invisible wound becomes more visible within the other, and the more they try to deny it, the more it manifests. Because certain presences once lost turn everything into compared absence. Those who lost you might even speak of you with disdain, might tell others it was better this way. But at night, when the masks fall, the comparison begins. It doesn't ask permission. It invades. It hurts. Because you became the standard of soul, of devotion, of care. And what's genuine can't be forgotten. It can be silenced, but never replaced. And those who try discover the bitter taste of almost. Almost the same. Almost similar. Almost you. But never you. The cruelest part of comparison is that it's never satisfied. It always returns, always reevaluates, always finds you in the small details, in silences, in gestures, in gazes. And when that happens, those who lost you understand. You weren't an exaggeration. You were intensity misunderstood, not dependence, devotion, and that isn't found on every corner. Because those who live half-heartedly will never understand those who love wholly. And now your absence became a wound, but not just any wound. A wound with a name, a face, and a memory. Vanishing with grace wasn't about punishing, it was about respecting what you offered. And now, those who hurt you must face the fact that, in losing you, they didn't just lose a companion. They lost the only place where they could be vulnerable without judgment, where they could err without being abandoned, and where they could be embraced, even in silence. That realization comes slowly. But when it arrives, it doesn't leave. It lingers in every new relationship, every new attempt to forget. And nothing works, because you can't forget what was sincere. The emotional control you showed by stepping away became a mirror. And those who look into that mirror now don't see you, they see themselves, trying to fill a space that can't be filled with just anything. Because what you were was unique. And when the other realizes this, there's no going back. Because you're no longer in the same place, not in life, not in energy, not in frequency. And those who try to reach you now find only the echo of your evolution. Stoic wisdom transforms pain into maturity. And you did that. You didn't cling to the idea of being remembered, but you were. You didn't insist on being valued, but you were. Because when someone touches a soul with truth, their presence becomes a living memory, and no replacement erases that. On the contrary, it only reinforces the absence, reinforces the comparison, reinforces the emotional pain of those who know they lost someone and don't know where to look anymore. And if today the other lives trying to replace you, it's because you were so real, so present, so profound, that now nothing else is enough. And in the next topic, we'll talk about the screaming void. How silence fills more than forced presence. Therefore, the screaming void. How silence fills more than forced presence. There's a type of presence that even with a whole body has already left inside. You know this type well. The gaze that no longer touches. The words spoken out of obligation. The automatic, cold gestures, as if merely following a routine script. And the pain of that is as deep as it is silent, because it's possible to be next to someone and feel lonelier than if you were alone. Forced presence weighs. It drains. It wears down. And when you realize that staying would mean ignoring your own soul, you choose silence. A silence that isn't absence, it's liberation. You withdrew. And it wasn't out of pride or an emotional game. It was out of lucidity, out of inner strength. Because powerful silence is the most honest response when presence becomes toxic, or worse, indifferent. And those who lost you might not understand this right away. They might think your absence is an overreaction, but time reveals your silence fills more. Because it's not laden with falseness or tension. It comes clean. It comes as a clear sign that you don't accept less than what you give, that you won't stay where your soul can't breathe. And that's when the scream of the void begins, a mute but deafening scream, because the other slowly realizes they'd rather have you there in silence, whole, than be with anyone who just takes up space. And what was once mere physical presence now reveals itself as superficial. Conversations are short. Hugs are empty. And the mind starts to wander, to remember, to compare, to regret. Because the silence you left wasn't cold. It was profound. And profundity, once felt, no longer accepts shallowness. The strategic absence you chose became a sanctuary of peace. While the other searched for you in others' voices, you rediscovered your own essence. And that rediscovery gave you something the relationship no longer offered. Tranquility. You stopped fighting to be heard, stopped trying to explain yourself, stopped asking for the basics. And in that stopping, you rose. Rose to the level of someone who understands that emotional control is the bridge to true freedom. And the Stoic mind knows the absence that heals is worth more than the presence that hurts. Those who lost you now feel the silence you left not as indifference, but as contrast, because they're surrounded by superficial presences, and none of them offer what you offered in silence: peace, stability, truth. Those who live in haste don't understand the value of what's serene. But when the serene is gone, haste becomes torment. And that torment comes in the subtlest forms: a memory upon waking, a scent in the middle of the street, a longing no one understands. Because you weren't just presence, you were feeling in human form. The void that remained can't be denied. It's there, in the middle of routine, in the absence of your questions, in the lack of your listening. And those who lost you now understand: silence teaches. It teaches that pretending presence doesn't hold anyone. It teaches that being is more than seeming to be, and that when the soul leaves, the body is just a shadow, and no shadow warms, no shadow fills, no shadow consoles. And now, all that's left is dealing with the emotional pain of having traded your real silence for empty presences. The Stoic mind doesn't take pleasure in the void it leaves, but it recognizes that sometimes you must leave, so the other sees how necessary you were, not out of ego, but out of balance, out of connection, out of depth. And those who only realize this too late must live with the absence that teaches, the one that doesn't return, that doesn't negotiate, that simply moves on. Because you're no longer willing to diminish yourself to fit in spaces that can't hold your soul. Vanishing with grace is an act of self-love, of silent respect. You didn't abandon, you freed yourself. And that liberation made you grow. While the other stayed trapped in the noise of what's superficial, you dove into the silence that heals. And now, those who lost you, feel it. Feel not just your absence, but the screaming void you left. A void that won't be filled with promises, attempts, or distractions, because you became irreplaceable. The Stoic wisdom that moved you doesn't seek revenge or reconciliation. It seeks coherence, and when you chose to leave, it was because you understood that staying would be a betrayal of yourself. And those who hurt someone already staying silent out of love end up alone. Alone in a crowd. Alone even when embraced. Because what hurts isn't the absence of just anyone. It's the absence of someone who carried peace in their gaze. You may not have said anything when you left, but your silence stayed. And it teaches more than words. It teaches that presence is soul, and that when the soul leaves, all that's left is the echo of what could have been, and that echo will keep resonating, because in the next topic, we'll talk about the weight of indifference. The silence that disarms any provocation. The weight of indifference. The silence that disarms any provocation. True indifference isn't coldness. It's emotional maturity in its purest form. It's when the soul, exhausted from explaining, justifying, defending, chooses silence as armor and calm as a sword. Not to hurt, but to no longer be hurt. And that's when the weight of indifference is born, not as punishment, but as protection. You stopped reacting, stopped trying to show how much it hurts, stopped proving yourself to someone who already chose not to see. And in doing so, you freed yourself, and those who lost you, lost themselves. Provocation only has power when it finds a crack, a vulnerable point, an unresolved need. But when you become a Stoic mind, there's no longer a place for the other to plant their spears. You became whole. Being complete scares those who fed off your flaws, because now there's no way to provoke you. Your reactions were fuel. Your suffering was an argument. But all that's been deactivated. You no longer give in. You don't respond. You just observe. Or better, you don't even observe. Because those who learn to withdraw also learn not to be shaken. The powerful silence you now carry is more lethal than any word. Because it doesn't shout, doesn't accuse, doesn't beg. It simply exists. And its existence is enough to disarm those who once tried to control you through chaos. Stoicism teaches that nothing from the outside should disturb the peace within. And you understood that. Applied it, embodied it, turned your strategic absence into a shield, and those who try to reach you now only hit their own emptiness. It's a painful irony for those who lost you. Before, a single gesture, a harsh word, a malicious comment was enough, and you'd waver. Now, you don't even respond with a glance. Your presence is an absence of reaction. Your strength is not reacting. And that, for someone addicted to your drama, is unbearable. Because you broke the cycle, broke the game, broke the expectation. Vanishing with grace was just the first step. What came next was subtler. You stopped being a stage for the other's theater. Indifference, when born from healed pain, carries an elegance no one can imitate. Because it's not forced, it's natural. You simply lost interest, lost the need, lost the bond that sustained that emotional battlefield. And now, there's no more war. And the silence you left on the field is the most painful victory for those who expected conflict. Because there's no greater defeat than failing to provoke someone who once reacted with a heart laid bare. The self-control you achieved became poison to the other's ego. And not because you wanted to hurt, but because you no longer let yourself be hurt. You understood that the greatest power lies in keeping your own peace intact, in not offering your energy to those who didn't know how to care for it. The Stoic mind, when it matures, learns to smile inwardly at provocations, not out of sarcasm, but out of liberation. You no longer need to win arguments, because you won yourself. Those who try to provoke you now find a soft wall, not of stone, but of awareness. A wall that doesn't strike back, it absorbs. That doesn't defend, it observes. And that disarms any attempt at conflict, because the true response now is silence. A silent, steadfast, unshakable response. Those who didn't value you before expected you to still be vulnerable, but now your inner strength is like a field of peace nothing can disturb. And that, for someone who only knew how to handle chaos, is a blow no words can describe. The other tries to poke, tries to provoke longing, jealousy, doubt, but you're no longer in the same game. You grew, you transcended. And those who didn't keep up with your growth are left trying to talk to old versions of you. But those versions are dead. And in their place, someone was born who understood the true meaning of silence as a weapon of wisdom. And now, every gesture of yours carries a serene authority, a calm that screams louder than any heated argument. You're no longer touched by what comes from outside, because you built, within, a temple of balance. And in that temple, there's no room for provocations. There's only space for what nourishes, builds, expands. Everything that tries to pull you from that place simply has no more access. And those who once held the keys now realize they lost the right to enter. Because you didn't close the door with hatred. You simply changed your emotional address. And the pain of those who try to provoke and get no response is subtle but constant. It's a wound that doesn't bleed, but burns. Because the absence of reaction is the most powerful response anyone can offer. It's the clearest message that inner peace is worth more than any external satisfaction. And you understood that with mastery. Now, those who lost you must face the fact that they didn't just lose you. They lost the power to shake you. You won. And not because you reacted with more force, but because you stopped reacting. Not because you shouted louder, but because you stayed silent with more dignity. The Stoic mind elevated you. And now, from the height of your serenity, you observe those still trapped in cycles of provocation. And there's nothing more painful for the ego than realizing it can no longer reach you. And that is just the beginning. Because in the next topic, we'll talk about the pain of elegant disdain. You don't disappear to punish, you disappear to preserve yourself. Max the pain of elegant disdain. You don't disappear to punish, you disappear to preserve yourself. There's a type of disdain that doesn't shout, doesn't rage, doesn't need to raise its voice. It's elegant disdain, the kind that doesn't manifest in words, but in absence. That doesn't hurt with anger, but with indifference. And maybe that's why it hurts so much, because it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like a decision. And that's what destabilizes those who lost you. Realizing you didn't disappear out of pettiness, pride, or tactics, but out of emotional survival. Vanishing with grace is like closing a door without making noise, but with the resolve of someone who will never return to that same inner place. Your absence wasn't an act of vengeance, but of preservation. You didn't leave to cause pain, but to protect your own soul from more unnecessary scars. And it's precisely that silent, stoic, serene choice that has the greatest impact. Because those who hurt you expected your return, counted on your emotional relapse. But what they got was a powerful silence, a withdrawal without explanation, a silent response wrapped in dignity. And that absence that teaches, that doesn't justify itself, that doesn't unravel, became the most painful mirror for those who thought they still had some power over you. The stoicism you embraced gave you this rare ability to choose silence not as cowardice, but as strength. Those who lost you now start to understand that disdaining someone elegantly is different from ignoring them. Ignoring is emotional. It's an impulsive act, sometimes resentful. But disdaining with elegance is philosophical. It's the rational choice to withdraw from where there's no reciprocity. And that choice, calm, clean, mature, is a sharp blow to the vanity of those who believed you'd always be there, waiting, insisting, begging for emotional crumbs. You didn't close the door. You left it open, but you chose not to walk through it anymore. And that, for those expecting a scene, a plea, a dramatic second chance, was the subtlest and sharpest pain. Because the strategic absence you built didn't come with prior notice. It came with silence, and silence, when born from the exhaustion of the soul, asks for nothing more. It just goes. And those accustomed to controlling through affection collapse in the face of a stoic mind that refuses to be hurt again. Detaching with serenity is an art, and you mastered it. You understood that the greatest form of self-love is stepping away from where there's no value. The emotional pain you carried within turned into awareness, and that awareness turned into action, and that action turned into absence. And now, those who lost you try to understand. How could someone who loved me so much leave like that without a word? But the answer is simple. You didn't leave all at once. You left little by little, inside, silently, until there was nothing left. Elegant disdain isn't coldness, it's protection. It's like placing an invisible cloak between you and the world that hurts you. It's when you decide you've bled enough trying to mend torn relationships. And so, instead of retaliating, you withdraw, without a scene, without drama, without announcement. And that's what disarms. Because the other expected resistance, expected a reaction, expected chaos. But what they got was emptiness. And that emptiness hurts. Because it has nothing to lean on, nothing to fight against. It just exists. And the more it exists, the more it hurts. You chose not to destroy yourself trying to save what didn't want to be saved. And that choice, made with calm but with resolve, is the greatest act of stoic wisdom. Because you understood that preserving yourself is nobler than trying to convince the other of your worth. You left because it became clear. Staying would mean abandoning yourself. And those who lost you now feel the weight of that unspoken decision, because the silence you left isn't mute. It speaks. It explains. It reveals everything words could never express. And if there's a pain that erodes the ego, it's this: realizing that someone who loved deeply stopped loving in silence. Not because the love ended suddenly, but because it was suffocated, worn out, underestimated. And now, all that's left is dealing with the absence of someone who was whole, until they could no longer be. Those who didn't value you now watch from afar your evolution, see your peace, see your inner strength, and feel. Feel the pain of elegant disdain like someone feeling the cold of a house warmed by you. That's now empty. The Stoic mind doesn't wish for the other's suffering, but it understands that some pains are teachers, and you became that pain. Not because you wanted to cause suffering, but because you represent what was lost and doesn't return. Because elegant disdain teaches through silence. It teaches that absence is also a type of presence, the most striking of all. The presence of what's no longer there, and that now lives only as a memory. You don't disappear to punish. You disappear because you gave everything, because you tried too much, because you finally learned not to let yourself be emptied trying to fill the other. And those who didn't understand this now live haunted by an absence that doesn't shout, but never stays quiet. And it's in that absence that the universe begins to act, because what was done returns, even if you don't see it, even if you've already moved on. In the next and final topic, we'll talk about the invisible return, when the universe responds in silence too. The invisible return, when the universe responds in silence too. Not every return makes noise. In fact, the most powerful ones are silent. They don't arrive with a bang or declared vengeance. The universe's invisible return is subtle, precise, unquestionable. It works in the shadows of conscience, in the folds of time, in the margins of life. And those who hurt you, without realizing it, are already reaping what they sowed. Because what goes, comes back. And it comes back in the most unexpected way, through your absence. The absence that taught without speaking, that healed without medicine, that answered without words. That absence is invisible justice in action. Stoicism teaches that we shouldn't seek revenge, but inner justice. And the universe, which watches everything with unblinking eyes, takes care of the rest. There's no rush, no spectacle, just a cycle being fulfilled. And those who once belittled you now live surrounded by situations that mirror everything they made you feel, not as punishment, but as learning. Because the universe doesn't punish, it returns. And the return doesn't come with an apology note. It comes with lessons disguised as loss, frustration, longing, and silence. The invisible return is the moment when the other faces a mirror and recognizes, it was me. It was me who pushed away. It was me who disregarded. It was me who didn't see. And now what returns isn't just longing, it's conscience. And conscience, when it awakens, is the most relentless judge there is, because it doesn't forget, doesn't pretend, doesn't mask. It shows, without filters, the impact of every choice, every word, every misinterpreted silence. And in that invisible tribunal, there's no defense. You, on the other hand, don't need to move, nor wish harm, nor rejoice in the other's pain. Because you've already learned through powerful silence to trust in the order of life. You learned that true inner strength lies in staying steadfast in your own peace while the world does what it must. And the world, Nathana, does. It may take time, it may seem slow, but it acts, because every seed, sooner or later, finds its soil. And those who planted pain will reap discomfort. Those who planted disdain will reap silent regret, and those who lost you will reap silence where there was once warmth. The strategic absence you built was your way of leaving without losing yourself, and now it's become fertile ground for the invisible return. It's not seen, but it's felt. It's not announced, but it imposes itself. Life returns with precision, with justice, with wisdom. And those who once made you doubt yourself now search in other faces for what only you offered. But they don't find it. Because what's real can't be copied. What's soul can't be replaced. And the universe knows that. The Stoic mind understands that time is an ally, and that no pain needs a stage to be validated. That's why you didn't retaliate. You simply waited, not waiting for the other to return, but for life to give the answers you no longer needed to give. And now those answers are arriving, in silence, in reflections, in absences, in longings, and above all, in voids. Voids you once filled with presence, now voids no one else can touch. The invisible return has no set date, but when it arrives, it settles in. And it settles in the details, in lost gazes, in involuntary comparisons, in inexplicable discomfort, in nights when the pillow weighs more than conscience can bear. That's when silence takes its revenge, but not with hatred, with elegance. Because the universe also knows how to vanish with grace. You, who cried so much in silence, now reap peace. You, who begged for crumbs of attention, now live in the abundance of self-love. And that transformation is the greatest return. The universe gave you back to yourself, and gave the other everything they threw away. Now it's they who live searching for what's no longer available. And that's the true consequence, understanding, too late, the value of what can no longer be had. Invisible justice acts where human justice can't reach. It cuts through appearances, dismantles egos, and delivers without fail what each deserves. You didn't need to curse or wish harm. Your silence was enough. Because silence, when born of wisdom, becomes a foundation for the universe's balance. And that balance, Nathana, always restores itself. Always. Now, those who lost you, feel it. Feel the weight of what they did. Feel the void of what they lost. And feel the silent return of their own conscience knocking at the door. But you're no longer there to open it. Because you're in another place, in another frequency, in another version. And those who want to reach that new version will need to be reborn too. And in the end, everything that goes comes back. And everything that comes back transformed, including you. Because now, you're no longer the one who cried. You're the one who observes, in peace. Now that you understand the silent wounds your silence inflicts on those who lost you, the question that remains is, will you keep insisting in places that don't know how to hear you? Or will you learn, once and for all, that silence is also a response, and often the wisest one? Stoicism doesn't teach revenge, it teaches staying whole, even when the world tries to break you. It teaches that you don't need to prove anything to anyone, because your absence already says everything that needed to be said. So now, put this into practice. Don't demand explanations where there's no reciprocity. Don't beg for attention where your soul was mistreated. Withdraw in peace. Vanish with elegance. Let time and the universe do the rest. Write in the comments, "My absence now is wisdom." That will be your seal of emotional evolution. And if this content truly touched you, subscribe to the channel right now and activate the bell, because here you learn to transform pain into strength, without losing lightness or soul, and more. In the first pinned comment, you'll find a free ebook that will guide you even deeper into this journey of emotional control, stoic wisdom, and inner strength. Download it now and keep evolving, in silence, but with power.